Admiral Lee Jin-ho stepped out of the small transport shuttle onto the gleaming docking bay of the Starwind. The massive luxury cruise ship stretched endlessly in both directions, its polished silver hull reflecting the lights of 1,000 stars. This was supposed to be the most expensive passenger vessel in the galaxy, designed by the Vex to showcase their advanced technology and superior culture. Jin-ho wore a simple brown jacket and dark pants, looking like any other human tourist taking a vacation between the outer colonies. His military-issued neural implants were powered down, and his identification showed him as Kim Dae-ho, a mining equipment salesman from the Kepler sector. Nobody would recognize the weathered face and graying hair of the man who had single-handedly saved 3 star systems from the core invasion fleets. The boarding ramp was made of some kind of crystalline material that chimed softly under his boots. Everywhere he looked, Jin-ho saw the elegant curves and flowing designs that the Vex were famous for. Holographic art displays floated in midair, showing abstract patterns that shifted and danced in mesmerizing ways. The air itself seemed to shimmer with tiny particles that made everything glow with a soft blue. Light dotted as he approached the main reception desk, Jin-ho noticed how the other passengers moved around him. The Vex travelers were tall and graceful, their blue skin marked with intricate silver tattoos that indicated their social rank. They wore robes that seemed to flow like liquid, and their large eyes regarded him with barely concealed disgust. A group of wealthy Tonari merchants, their scaly green skin gleaming under the ship's lights, whispered among themselves in their clicking language while pointing at him. The reception desk was carved from a single piece of what looked like purple crystal, manned by a young Vex female whose name tag read Collar. Her forearms moved with practiced efficiency as she processed passenger documents, but when Jin-ho approached, her movements became deliberately slow and careless. Papers, she said without looking up, her voice carrying the typical Vex accent that made every word sound musical yet condescending. Jin-ho handed over his identification pad and travel documents. He had paid for a premium suite on Deck 3, with full access to all the ship's facilities and restaurants. The cost had been enough to buy a small starship. But money wasn't an issue when you were traveling under a fake identity provided by Terran intelligence. Kayla's large eyes scanned the documents, and Jin-ho saw her expression shift from bored indifference to active dislike. Human, she muttered, as if the word tasted bad in her mouth. She typed something into her terminal with unnecessary force, her long fingers striking the holographic keys harder than needed. Deck 12, room 847, she announced, sliding a keycard across the counter like she was disposing of something unpleasant. That's the human section. Try not to bother the other passengers during your stay. Jin-ho picked up the keycard and glanced at it. Room 847 was nowhere near the premium suite he had booked. Deck 12 was the lowest passenger level, right above the cargo holds and engine maintenance areas. The air would be stale, the rooms would be tiny, and the constant vibration from the ship's massive fusion engines would make sleep difficult. I believe there's been a mistake, he said politely. My reservation shows Suite 3A. Kayla's second set of arms crossed over her chest while she continued working with the primary pair. No mistake. Company policy requires humans to be housed in designated areas for the comfort and safety of our premium passengers. Round him, Jin-ho could hear the whispered conversations of other passengers. An elderly Vex male in an elaborate golden robe was telling his companion about the contamination risk of allowing humans into the upper decks. A group of Tonari traders were placing bets on whether the dirt whirler would cause trouble before the voyage ended. The intercom system crackled to life, and Captain Brix's voice echoed through the boarding area. The Vex captain spoke in the formal, flowery style that his species preferred for official announcements. Honored passengers of the Starwind, this is your captain speaking. We will be departing shortly for our luxurious journey to the Andros system. Our voyage will take 3 standard days, during which you will experience the finest amenities that Vex Hospitality can provide. Please note that meal service in our premium dining facilities will be restricted to appropriate species during designated times. Human passengers are kindly requested to utilize decks 10 through 12 during all meal periods to ensure the comfort of our distinguished clientele. Jinho listened to the announcement without changing expression. He had faced down entire enemy fleets without flinching, and a little casual racism wasn't going to ruin his day. Besides, this trip wasn't really a vacation. Intelligence reports suggested that Krill raiders were operating in this sector, and the Starwind was exactly the kind of high-value target they preferred. He took his keycard and walked toward the passenger lifts, noting the security cameras tracking his movement and the subtle way other passengers stepped aside to avoid contact. A small Vex child pointed at him and asked his mother something in their native language. The woman quickly pulled the child away, shooting Jinho a look of disgust. The lift to Deck 12 was cramped and poorly maintained compared to the elegant passenger elevators that served the upper levels. It moved slowly and made concerning grinding noises as it descended through the ship's multiple levels. When the doors finally opened, Jinho found himself in a narrow corridor with bare metal walls and harsh lighting that hurt his eyes. Room 847 was exactly what he had expected. The space was barely large enough for a single bed, a tiny desk, and a wall-mounted hygiene unit. The porthole was so small he could barely see outside, and the constant thrumming of the engines made the walls vibrate continuously. His luggage, which should have been delivered by service robots, had been simply dumped on the floor. Jinho unpacked his few belongings and settled in for what he knew would be an interesting 3 days. Through his small porthole, he could see the Starwind beginning to move away from the station, its massive engines creating brilliant streams of blue plasma that lit up the surrounding space. He had no way of knowing that his quiet vacation was about to become something much more dangerous, or that the crew's treatment of him would soon seem like the least of their problems. The second morning aboard the Starwind started peacefully enough. Jinho had spent most of the previous day exploring the areas where humans were allowed to go, which wasn't much. The lower decks were cramped and poorly ventilated, filled with other human passengers who looked just as uncomfortable as he felt. Most were traders, miners, or technicians traveling between colonies, people who had saved up for years just to afford passage on this supposedly luxurious vessel. Jinho was eating breakfast in the small human dining area when the first alarm started. It wasn't the gentle chime that announced meal times or docking procedures. This was a sharp, urgent wail that cut through every conversation and made everyone freeze with their food halfway to their aim. Out HS. The ship's intercom crackled to life, and Captain Brix's voice filled the dining hall, though he sounded much less confident than during his welcome speech. Attention passengers, we are experiencing a minor technical issue with our sensor array. Please remain calm and continue your normal activities. But the alarms kept wailing, and Jinho could feel the subtle change in the ship's movement as it adjusted course. His military training kicked in automatically, reading the signs that most civilians would miss. The artificial gravity fluctuated slightly as the ship's power systems redirected energy to different areas. The gentle hum of the life support systems changed pitches. Backup generators came online through the small porthole in the dining area. Jinho caught glimpses of something that made his blood run cold. Distant lights were moving against the star-filled, and they were moving in patterns that no civilian traffic would follow. He excused himself from the table and made his way to the nearest observation deck, using routes he had memorized during his exploration the day before. The observation deck was one of the few areas where humans were technically allowed, though The Vex passengers made it clear they weren't welcome. It was a large, transparent dome that offered a spectacular view of space in all directions. When Jin-Ho arrived, he found it crowded with worried passengers from various species, all pointing at the lights moving outside. That's when Security Chief Nom made his grand entrance. The Vex security officer was an impressive sight, standing nearly 8 feet tall with muscular arms and skin that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns. His uniform was covered in medals and rank insignia that seemed designed more for show than function. Behind him walked a squad of security robots, their chrome bodies gleaming under the observation deck's lights. "Citizens of the galaxy," Nom announced in a booming voice, his forearms spread wide in a theatrical gesture. "There is no cause for alarm. Our sensors have detected a small group of scavenger vessels attempting to follow our course. This is a common occurrence in deep space, where desperate criminals hope to pick through the garbage we leave behind." The crowd murmured nervously, but Nom continued with growing confidence. "These pathetic ships pose no threat to the magnificent Starwind. Our defensive systems are the most advanced in the galaxy, designed by the greatest Vex military engineers. A few rusty scavenger boats are nothing compared to our superior firepower and tactics." Jin-Ho moved closer to the main viewport, using his height advantage to see over the shorter passengers. What he saw made his stomach drop. Those weren't scavenger ships limping along behind them. They were sleek, predatory vessels moving in perfect formation, their hulls designed for speed and stealth. Even worse, there weren't just a few of them. His experienced eye counted at least 15 contacts, with more probably hiding behind sensor shadows. The ship configuration was unmistakable. These were Krill raiders, the most dangerous pirates in known space, unlike the desperate criminals that Nom was describing. The Krill were organized, well-equipped, and absolutely ruthless. They specialized in capturing luxury vessels like the Starwind, stealing everything valuable and selling the passengers into slavery in the Outer Rim territories. Nom was still pontificating to the crowd, his voice getting louder and more arrogant. With each word, "You humans wouldn't understand real combat tactics anyway. Your species has always relied on brute force and lucky accidents. The Vex, however, have studied warfare for thousands of years. We understand the subtle art of space combat, the delicate dance of energy weapons and defensive screens." Jin-Ho couldn't stay quiet any longer. He pushed through the crowd, trying to catch Nom's attention without causing a scene. "Excuse me, Security Chief," he said politely, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the background chatter. Nom's large eyes focused on him with obvious irritation. "What is it, human? Can't you see I'm addressing important passengers? Those ships." Jin-Ho pointed toward the viewport. "They're using a pincer formation. Look at how they're spreading out on both sides while staying just outside optimal weapon range. You might want to consider raising your defensive screens and..." "Silence, human." Nom's voice exploded across the observation deck, and his tentacle-like facial appendages flared out in an impressive display of anger. "Do not presume to instruct your betters in the art of warfare. Your primitive species barely understands how to fly in straight lines, let alone comprehend the sophisticated tactics of evolved civilizations." The crowd turned to stare at Jin-Ho, and he could see the mixture of embarrassment and fear in their faces. Most of the alien passengers nodded approvingly at Nom's outburst, clearly believing that a human had no business offering military advice to a Vex officer. Jin-Ho stepped back, his hands raised in surrender. "I apologize for the interruption," he said quietly, though his eyes never left the VIWPO or T. Nom strutted closer, his forearms gesturing dramatically as he addressed the crowd again. "This is exactly what I mean about human arrogance. They see a few ships in space and immediately assume they understand complex military situations. These scavengers are probably running on outdated engines and carrying weapons that were obsolete before your grandparents were born. But Jin-Ho was no longer listening to non-speech. He was watching the enemy ships complete their positioning, spreading out in a perfect encirclement pattern that would cut off any escape routes. He could see the telltale energy signatures of their weapons charging, the subtle course corrections that indicated they were preparing for a coordinated attack through the ship's internal windows. He could see Vex crew members running through the corridors, but their movements were panicked and disorganized. They were preparing their defenses exactly wrong, focusing their energy screens on the wrong sectors and positioning their weapon batteries to cover approaches that the enemy had already moved past. The Star Wind was about to be attacked by one of the most dangerous pirate fleets in the galaxy, and its crew was preparing to fight ghosts while the real threat closed in from all sides. Jin-Ho felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders, even though he was supposed to be just another passenger on a luxury cruise dot in the distance. The first enemy ship fired a warning shot across the star winds bow, and the real battle was about to begin. The warning shot from the lead enemy vessel struck the star wind's forward shield ray like a hammer blow. The entire ship shuddered, and the lights flickered as power systems struggled to compensate. But this wasn't just a single pirate ship firing a warning shot. As Jin-Ho watched through the observation deck's massive viewport, more and more vessels dropped their stealth fields, revealing themselves like predators emerging from tall grass. What Security Chief Nom had dismissed as a few scavenger ships was actually a full crew battle fleet. 30 sleek warships now surrounded the luxury cruiser in a perfect sphere formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapon ports and sensor rays. These weren't desperate pirates flying rusty buckets held together with spare parts. These were military-grade vessels, each one capable of reducing the Star Wind to scrap metal in minutes. The ship's intercom system crackled with Captain Brix's panicked voice. "All passengers to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, all passengers to emergency stations." But chaos erupted instantly because nobody knew where the emergency stations actually were. The Vex crew had been so focused on luxury and comfort that they had barely bothered with safety. Drills, passengers from dozens of different species ran through the corridors in complete confusion, some heading toward the lifeboats, others trying to reach their rooms. Many simply standing in place and screaming. The first real attack came without warning. A barrage of plasma bolts hammered into the Star Wind's starboard side, overwhelming the shields and punching through the outer hull. The ship lurched violently to port, throwing passengers against bulkheads and shattering decorative crystal displays throughout the passenger areas. Jin-Ho was thrown to the floor of the observation deck along with everyone else, but his military training kept him focused. While other passengers were still trying to figure out which way was up, he was already analyzing the situation. The krill ships were using a classic capture formation, targeting the engines and weapon systems while avoiding the passenger sections. They wanted the ship intact and the passengers alive for the slave markets. Emergency lighting bathed everything in angry red, and the ship's artificial gravity began fluctuating wildly. Through the chaos, Jin-Ho could hear Security Chief Nom shouting contradictory orders to his security robots, but his voice was high and panicked now. Nothing like the confident bluster from just minutes before. "Seal the blast doors on Deck 7. No, wait. Open them. Where are the emergency protocols? Why isn't anyone answering their communicators?" Another volley of enemy fire struck the ship. And this time Jin-Ho heard the distinctive sound of hole breaches. Somewhere in the ship's lower sections, atmosphere was bleeding out into space, taking with it anyone who might have been caught in the affected areas. A young human woman stumbled past him, clutching a crying child to her chest. Behind her, An elderly tonnery merchant was limping badly, green blood flowing from a gash on his scaled forehead. The observation deck was filling with injured passengers. But there were no medical personnel in sight. Jin-Ho made his decision. He stood up and began moving through the crowd, his voice calm and authoritative despite the chaos around him. "You three, help carry the injured to the central corridor. You find anything that can be used as bandages. Everyone else, move away from the outer hull. The safest place is near the ship's core." A Vex passenger looked at him with confusion. "Who are you to give orders, human?" "Someone who knows what he's doing," Jin-Ho replied, already moving toward the next group of panicked passengers. The ship shook again as another barrage found its mark. This time, the lights went out completely for several seconds before the emergency power kicked in. When the illumination returned, Jin-Ho could see that one of the outer viewports had developed a spider web of cracks. If it failed, everyone in this section would be sucked out into space. He grabbed a maintenance toolkit from an emergency panel and began working on the viewport's emergency seals. While he worked, he continued coordinating the passenger evacuation with the same calm efficiency he had once used to direct fleet movements across entire star systems. "Listen to me," he called out to the crowd. "The enemy wants us alive, which means they're not trying to destroy the ship. But our own crew is panicking, and that's what's going to get us killed. We need to help ourselves." A security robot stumbled into the observation deck, its chrome plating scorched and one arm hanging uselessly at its side. "Emergency protocols. Cannot locate. Command structure compromised." It repeated in a mechanical voice before collapsing completely. That's when Jin-Ho realized just how bad things had gotten. The Vex crew wasn't just panicking. They were completely falling apart. Through the ship's internal communication system, he could hear Captain Briggs screaming at his officers, Security Chief demanding impossible things from his broken robots, and engineering personnel abandoning their posts as more hull breaches opened throughout the ship. The Starwind was dying, not from enemy fire, but from the incompetence of its own crew. Jin-Ho found an emergency communication panel and managed to access the ship's internal sensors. What he saw made his blood run cold. Fires were spreading through decks 4 and 5. The main engine room was flooded with coolant from a ruptured line. Half the lifeboats had been launched prematurely with no passengers aboard, triggered by crew members who had panicked and hit the wrong controls. But the worst part was the passenger distribution. Hundreds of people were trapped in sections that were slowly losing atmosphere, while other areas sat empty because the crew had given contradictory evacuation orders. Another impact shook the ship, and Jin-Ho heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging. The Krill ships were preparing for a boarding action, and when they arrived, they would find a ship full of helpless passengers and a crew that couldn't organize a proper defense if their lives depended on it, which they did. Jin-Ho looked around, the observation deck at the phasers staring at him with growing hope. These people needed leadership, and their own crew had abandoned them. He thought about his cover identity, about the comfortable anonymity of being just another passenger. Then he thought about what would happen to these people if someone didn't take charge. The decision wasn't really a choice at all. He activated the emergency communication system and began speaking in the command voice that had once coordinated the defense of 3 star systems. "Attention all passengers and crew. This is Admiral Lee Jin-Ho of the Terran Defense Fleet. I am assuming emergency command of this vessel. All passengers, prepare for immediate evacuation to secure areas. All crew members, report to your stations and await further orders." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of distant explosions and the ship's emergency klaxons. Then, slowly, people began to move with purpose instead of panic. The real battle was just beginning. The Starwind was dying round them. What had once been the most luxurious passenger vessel in the galaxy was now crippled wreck, listing heavily to port as its massive engine sputtered and failed. Through the ship's corridors, emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the constant groaning of stressed metal told everyone aboard that their time was running out. Jinho had spent the last hour coordinating evacuations and organizing defenses with nothing but his voice and his reputation. Word had spread quickly through the ship that a human admiral was taking charge, and somehow that impossible claim had given people hope. Passengers who had been panicking were now working together, following his calm instructions to seal hull breaches and tend to the wounded. But hope could only do so much against 30 krill warships and a crew that had completely fallen. Apart, the ship's main engines gave a final, shuddering cough and went silent. Without propulsion, the Starwind began to drift helplessly, its artificial gravity failing in sections as power systems shut down one by one through the hole. Everyone could hear the ominous sound of krill boarding pods attaching to the outer airlocks. The pirates were preparing to come aboard and claim their prize. Jinho made his way through the darkened corridors toward the bridge, stepping over debris and helping injured passengers as he went. The turbolift systems had failed hours ago, so he climbed through maintenance shafts and emergency ladders, following routes that most of the ship's own crew didn't even know existed. When he finally reached the command deck, he found a scene of complete chaos. Captain Brix was hunched over his command chair, his blue skin pale with shock as he stared at displays showing the ship's failing systems. His bridge crew was running round frantically, pressing buttons and shouting at each other in their musical Vex language, but nothing they did seemed to make any difference. Security Chief Nom was there too, his forearms gesturing wildly as he screamed orders at security robots that were either broken or had simply shut down. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by raw panic, and his bioluminescent skin patterns were flashing in rapid, chaotic sequences that indicated extreme stress. Captain Brix, Jinho said quietly as he stepped onto the bridge, his voice cutting through the noise and confusion. Every head turned toward him. The Vex officers stared at this human who had somehow made it to their sacred command center, their large eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "I need access to your communications ray," Jinho continued, walking calmly toward the central command console as if he belonged there. Captain Brix's voice cracked as he responded, his earlier commanding presence completely gone. "Get off my bridge, human. This is a restricted area. You have no authority here." But even as he spoke, another massive explosion rocked the ship. The krill boarding pods had breached the outer hull, and their assault teams were now cutting through the inner barriers. The sound of energy weapons echoed through the ship's ventilation systems, accompanied by the screams of passengers and crew who had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jinho didn't argue or explain. Instead, he simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, innocuous-looking device about the size of his thumb. To the Vex officers, it looked like nothing more than a simple data storage unit, the kind that any civilian might carry for personal files or entertainment. But when he pressed it against the main communication console, everything changed. The device interfaced with the ship's systems using protocols that shouldn't have existed, accessing communication channels that were supposedly classified at the highest levels of galactic security. The main display screen flickered and went dark for a moment, then blazed to life with an image that made every alien on the bridge gasp in disbelief. The screen now showed the bridge of a massive human dreadnought, its command center bustling with activity as officers in crisp military uniforms coordinated what was clearly a major fleet operation. At the center of it all stood a human captain, a woman with short black hair and the kind of bearing that could only come from years of command experience. "Admirably," Captain Park Minho said, snapping to attention with a crisp military salute. "We've been monitoring the situation and tracking your position. The fleet is in position and awaiting your orders, sir." The silence on the star winds bridge was so complete that Jinho could hear the individual breathing of every alien officer present. Captain Brix's jaw had literally dropped open, his mouth hanging slack as he stared at the impossible sight before him. Security Chief Noms' tentacles had gone completely limp, hanging round his face like deflated balloons. "Admiral Lee," whispered the ship's navigation officer, a young Vex female whose voice barely carried across the bridge. Jinho stepped forward to address the screen, his entire demeanor changing as he dropped the pretense of being a simple passenger. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded entire star systems, the calm confidence of a man who had faced impossible odds and won. "Captain Park, what's our tactical situation?" 37 Krill vessels in a standard capture formation. "Sir, we've got the civilian ship surrounded and are beginning boarding operations. No indication they're aware of our presence." "Excellent. All units, execute Pattern 7. Disable their engines and weapon systems, but preserve the civilian vessel and minimize casualties. These pirates might have valuable intelligence about Krill operations in this sector." "Understood. Admiral, Pattern 7 it is, through the star winds forward viewport." Something impossible began to happen. The empty space round the ship started to shimmer and distort, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then, one by one, human warships began to materialize out of nothing, their advanced stealth systems disengaging to reveal the most powerful fleet in known space. The Terran Defense Fleet had arrived. Dozens of sleek, predatory vessels appeared, in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive blue-white energy signatures of human military technology. At the center of the formation was Park Min-ho's flagship, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the luxury cruise ship. Its weapon ports were already glowing with contained energy, ready to unleash destruction on a scale that most species could barely comprehend. The Krill raiders, who had been so confident just moments before, suddenly found themselves surrounded by the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Their primitive sensors had never even detected the human ships approaching, and now they were trapped in a formation that would allow no escape. On the bridge of the Star Wind, the alien crew continued to stare in stunned silence. The human they had dismissed as an inferior species, the passenger they had forced to live in the worst quarters of their ship, was actually the most famous military commander in known space. Admiral Lee Jinho, the architect of humanity's greatest victories, the man who had single-handedly saved 3 star systems from the core invasion, had been traveling on their ship under a false identity. And now he was about to save all their lives. The battle that followed would be talked about for decades to come, but it would be over almost before it began. The Terran Defense Fleet moved like a living organism, each ship responding to Jinho's commands with precision that bordered on the supernatural. The Vex officers on the bridge watched in stunned silence as 37 human warships executed maneuvers that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. "Strike Team Alpha. Target the lead Krill battle cruiser's engine bay," Jinho commanded, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "Beta formation. Disable their communication relays. I want them blind and immobilized, not destroyed." Through the Star Wind's viewport, the alien crew witnessed something they had never seen before. Human military doctrine wasn't about overwhelming firepower or brutal destruction. It was about surgical precision, about achieving victory with minimal casualties even when facing ruthless enemies. The first wave of attacks came from the human destroyers, sleek vessels that moved through space like dancers, their weapons fired in perfect synchronization, sending focused energy beams that struck the Krill ship's engines with pinpoint accuracy. One by one, The pirate vessels found themselves dead in space, their propulsion systems disabled but their crews unharmed. Captain Brix leaned forward in his command chair, his large eyes reflecting the light from the tactical displays. "How are they doing this?" he whispered. "Those krill ships have military-grade shields and armor. It should take hours to disable them." Jinho glanced at him briefly before returning his attention to the battle. "Human weapons are designed differently than yours. We don't just build bigger guns and stronger shields. We study our enemies, learn their weaknesses, and develop technology specifically to exploit those vulnerabilities." A massive krill dreadnought, twice the size of any human vessel, attempted to break free from the encirclement. Its captain must have realized that his fleet was trapped and decided to make a desperate run for open space. The ship's engines fled to life, pushing it toward what looked like a gap in the human formation. But Jinho had anticipated this move. "Captain Park, execute Maneuver 17. Let's show them why running is pointless." The human flagship, along with two heavy cruisers, moved to intercept the fleeing dreadnought, but instead of engaging it directly, they used their tractor beams to create a gravitational web that slowly pulled the massive ship to a halt. The krill vessel struggled against the invisible force, its engines straining at maximum power, but it couldn't break free. Security Chief Nom, who had been silent since the fleet's arrival, finally found his voice. "Tractor beams don't work like that. You can't coordinate multiple ships to create a gravitational field. The physics don't allow it. Vex physics don't allow it," Jinho corrected gently. "Human understanding of gravitational mechanics is somewhat more advanced. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted exactly 17 minutes. Not a single krill ship was destroyed, but every one of them was completely disabled. Their weapons were offline, their engines dead, their communication systems jammed. The pirates who had seemed so threatening just an hour ago were now floating helplessly in space, waiting to be taken into custody. But what impressed the alien crew even more than the tactical victory was the aftermath. As soon as the last krill ship was disabled, the human fleet immediately shifted into rescue mode. Medical ships moved alongside the Starwind, their doctors and emergency technicians flooding aboard to treat the wounded passengers and crew. A young human medic, barely old enough to serve in the military, worked alongside an elderly Vex physician to treat an injured Tonari passenger. The human showed no trace of the arrogance or superiority that the aliens had expected. Instead, she was polite, professional, and focused entirely on saving lives. Captain Park's voice came through the communication system again, her tone respectful but informal in the way that only came from years of working together. "Admiral, we've got engineering teams standing by to help with the Starwind's repairs. The passenger manifests show we've got people from 17 different species aboard. Do you want us to contact their respective governments already taken care of?" Jinho replied, and Park, "Excellent work on the coordination. That gravitational web maneuver was flawless. Thank you, sir. The crew's been practicing it for months. We figured if we ever ran into a situation like this, we'd want options besides just blowing everything up." The casual interaction between the Admiral and his captain revealed something that shook the alien crew to their core. This wasn't a rigid military hierarchy held together by fear and discipline. These humans genuinely respected each other, and their chain of command was built on trust and competence rather than species superiority or SOC. Eel-ranked Doctor's human repair teams began fixing the Starwind's damaged systems. Captain Brix approached Jinho hesitantly. The Vex officer's earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by something that looked like shame. "Admiral Lee," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We treated you terribly, and you still saved our lives. I don't understand why." Jinho smiled, the same gentle expression he had worn when he first boarded the ship 3 days ago. "Captain, my people have a saying, strength without humility is just violence, but humility without strength is just weakness. We try to be strong enough to help others and humble enough to remember that we're all just people trying to get by in a dangerous universe." A small crowd had gathered round them, passengers and crew members from dozens of different species. They listened to his words with the kind of attention usually reserved for religious leaders or legendary heroes. "But why?" asked a young Vex engineer. "Why help us after the way we treated you? Your technology is clearly superior to us. Your military could conquer half the galaxy if you wanted to. Why do you choose to help instead?" Jinho looked round at the faces surrounding him. Seeing the genuine curiosity and confusion in their expressions, these people had grown up in cultures where strength meant dominance, where advanced technology was used to maintain superiority over other species. "Because that's not strength," he said simply. "Real strength is having the power to hurt someone and choosing not to. It's being able to demand respect and choosing to earn it instead. It's having advanced technology and using it to help people instead of controlling them." Receptionist Collar, who had been so dismissive when he first boarded, pushed through the crowd with tears in her large eyes. "Admiral, when you arrived, I treated you like you were nothing, like humans were beneath us. But you've shown us what real civilization looks like. You don't need to apologize," Jinho told her. "You didn't know who I was, and that's exactly the point. A person's worth shouldn't depend on their rank or their species or their wealth. It should depend on their character and their actions." As the human fleet began the process of escorting the Starwind to the nearest safe port, the alien passengers and crew found themselves seeing humanity in an entirely new light. These weren't the primitive, violent species they had been taught to despise. They were people who had learned to combine incredible strength with genuine compassion. The greatest lesson wasn't about human technology or military tactics. It was about the kind of species they aspired to be, powerful enough to protect the innocent, wise enough to show mercy to their enemies, and humble enough to treat everyone with dignity regardless of their background. That was humanity's true strength, and it was more impressive than any weapon they had ever built. D&D.